to give a quick thanks to the Tier 5 channel members and patrons. Bob the Dragon, Datamagnet, Sergeant Puma, Cat Crab Lobster, and Duck Machine. Thank you very much for the support. It is much appreciated. Story number 1. The Footman, written by Bellymaster. Are you here to help us? There were contracts to fill, deliveries to make, schedules to keep. Bill Matisse was a busy man, one of many shrewd humans to get involved in the interplanetary trade. He was one of the heads of a multi-trillion-dollar industry of raw mining. He oversaw shipments, quotas, and labor. They were just numbers, disposable workers, breedable resources. There was no difference between them and horses, a means to an end. Higher profit margins, bigger bonuses, more contracts. Are you here to help us? Bill turned his head. The image of the grimy worker was burned into his mind. He'd gotten down to one of their most profitable moons, Yota 4, to check up on production. It had fallen in recent months, and somebody was going to get fired for it. It was up to him to decide who. He'd literally only been walking from his shuttle to the head office, but that was all it took. His immaculate suit and clean complexion instantly set him apart as somewhat important. The workers had stopped hauling ore to watch, to observe this king amongst them. Mining footmen, specially bred to avoid legal definition of the term sapient. As a resource, they weren't exactly, legal, but they weren't illegal either. A grey area in the ethics committee that stayed grey through influence, lined pockets, and a bit of blood. Filthy, covered in dirt and fumes, the footman had approached him as he made his way to the office. His security detail disregarded the being, focused instead on a more realistic threats, like snipers, or mines, or orbital bombardment. He shouldn't have looked at it, but he did. Years of experience in averting his eyes came to naught. This being's bearing was so simple, so innocent, so broken, that he couldn't help but look. The footman had stared into him and spoke. Are you here to help us? A grunt of disgust, and he had walked off. One of his security detail took care of the creature for stealing his valuable time from him. He thought nothing of it for the rest of the day. Quotas, a meeting, fired a few people, intimidated the rest, back to business. But the words began to echo in his head over the next few weeks. Are you here to help us? A simple question. No, he wasn't. Bill was there to run a business. The tone, the innocence as it looked at him through the soot-blinded eyes, it knew that they needed help. In his heart, Bill knew what he was. He knew his price, knew his limits. If someone considered him a villain for what he did, that was fine. They would never know the world that he lived in. Yet, he had always been able to avoid the blunt truth. The numbers cycling through the ledgers that represented lives, the accidents, the liquidated mines. It always was justified, always excusable. There was always a nice drink at the end of the day and some exotic femme to take his mind off of work. But this image, this voice wasn't leaving his mind. He had been boiling alive in guilt for weeks. Bill turned in his bed, shifted, then sat up. Dark red light lit him as he rubbed his face and went over to the desk. The screen slid open. Alice, how many footmen have been employed by the company? A lovely voice answered him. Over 13 billion. Joey. The spreadsheet popped up, housing all the pertinent information about the autonomous labor. Thousands of mine, billions of lives in the red, growing exponentially. Are you here to help us? Alice, report on progress of intelligence and footmen. Smooth and silky, the voice answered. Approaching baseline, growing exponentially, culling practices maintained had suggested. Bill muted the voice and lowered his head into his hands, tears leaking from his eyes as he slowly convulsed in silent sobs. What was he doing? Were the profits worth these lives, mindless as they were? Was he making the world a better place? Were these the actions he'd condoned all these years? Could he change? Bill opened a closed browser with his shaking hands and established a secure link. The dark room closed in on him, and he opened an anonymous tip to the Department of Ethics. Red light burned in his hands as they blurred across the keyboard. He copied his drives and sources and sent them to 6 different secure locations, along with the names and locations of all his peers as insurance. A man could never be too careful. Bill's finger hovered over the send button, housing cohesive records of mining practices. This would tear apart everything he'd achieved and turn him traitor to his associates. They'd be out of blood. The Footman flashed into his mind. Are you here to help us? Bill hit the send button and whispered, Yes, I am. End of story. Story number 2. Brothers and Sisters by Pepperlorn. We found them due to serendipity, when a technician accidentally put in the wrong coordinates into the most sensitive radio telescope. Instead of background microwave radiation, we got a series of binary chirps, cycling every 64 patterns. An expedition was prepared immediately, and in mere days a task force launched. It took us slightly more than 1 week to reach our destination. It was located in a herithro, uninteresting region of space, the backwaters of the galaxy, so to speak. A region so lacking in resources, stars are few and far between, much less planetary systems. But existed they did. A blue pearl orbiting around a yellow dwarf, with clear electromagnetic signals being broadcast from the surface of the planet. We settled ourselves around the trailing liberation point of the planet, hiding our fleet amongst the asteroids there, setting up passive observation posts. We listened to their transmissions. Within the first 3 weeks, we managed to decode their audio and video transmissions, and we began watching. It took us an additional 4 months before our translator learned enough to do a plausible translation of their most commonly spoken language. They had many languages, probably because they had almost as many factions amongst themselves. They're not yet united, and it seems they often had conflicts amongst themselves. Conflicts that sometimes escalated into all-out war. And in their history, at least 3 times had blown to encompass the whole planet. Something we gleaned from a broadcast, mentioning about a global war that had happened in the past, a calamity called the Third World War. This is not a pacifist species. They fit better into the definition of a warmongering species. However, from the broadcasts, we also saw that they were capable of great altruistic deeds, how they came together when a natural catastrophe occurred, and how they founded many charities, some even for the express purpose of healing those wounded in more ways than one by the intermittent wars. And they were fun-loving. That is, if you can call death-defying acts such as jumping from ships, flying at the edge of space, or racing at a fraction of the speed of sound, or inflicting pain between themselves until one loses consciousness, to be fun activities. Talking about space, we could see that they were yet to take baby steps to becoming spacefaring species. The planet was quite dense and large, resulting in a deep gravity well that they seemed to have just beaten for the past few decades by relying on brute force. Lean, aerodynamic spikes climbing to the sky upon pillars of fire. Definitely repelled by scary explosive chemistry reactions instead of physical space-time manipulation. They had started to spread their mark into space, though. Quite evident from the number of synthetic satellites we detected streaking across the planet's near space, and from signals received from some other planets in the system. Signals sent most likely by semi-automated drones sent to explore the neighborhood, because they were still trapped on the surface, unable to leave. Yet. But we know they had aspirations. We'd seen news footage of some kind of super heavy launchers, chemically propelled brutes they hoped would be able to help them escape the surly bonds of their planet, to take their first steps to becoming an interplanetary species. And we have watched their audio-visual entertainment streams, imaginative fantasies clearly showing their longing to be out there, exploring the universe, meeting other species if there were any, and expanding themselves amongst the stars. We ached. We really ached for them, for they reminded us so much of ourselves. It was really, really hard to rein in our desire to reach out to them, to assist them in growing up and reaching the stars. But we have to be patient. We have learned the hard way that first contact is fraught with danger and misunderstanding. We do not want ourselves to be seen as gods and goddesses, but neither do we want to create enemies. For it'll be very heartbreaking to us to have them turn against us while all we want is for them to stand beside us as equals. We will plan, we will prepare, we will bring gifts of knowledge and equipment and scientists and healers. And we will lend them our protectors, because we know the galaxy is not always a nice place. And we are ready to fight to the death to protect this young species. So let it be known to the rest of the galaxy, we humans will not look kindly upon anyone wanting to bring harm to our newfound brothers and sisters, the Sylvanas. And if anyone dares to such foolishness, pray to your deities that your end will come swiftly and painlessly. Rear Admiral Antonio Mandagi, Chief Scientist and Commander of the Human Exploration Fleet 8, signing off. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed.